I watched the white powder dissolve into the champagne bubbles like a snowflake hitting hot asphalt. It was supposed to be my retirement toast, a celebration of the $35 million I just made selling my logistics empire. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, handed me the glass with a smile that could rot sugar. She thought she was about to inherit a fortune. She didn't know I had spent 40 years on the streets of Chicago learning one simple rule: kill or be killed. So when she turned her head to check her makeup, I didn't pour the drink out. I switched glasses with her mother. Within minutes, the screaming started. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a snake in your own backyard. I stood on the marble balcony of my estate looking down at the circus I had paid for. 200 people were down there drinking my liquor, eating my crab cakes, and pretending they liked me. They called it a retirement party. I called it a hunting ground. I adjusted the silk handkerchief in the pocket of my tuxedo, ensuring the lens of the micro camera button on my lapel was clear. I wasn't just an old man retiring. I was Desmond Carter. I built Carter Logistics from a single rusted truck into an empire that moved freight across 3 continents. I knew a setup when I saw one, and tonight, the air smelled like treachery. My son Darius was down there holding a glass of scotch he didn't pay for looking nervous. He was 32 years old, but he still looked like a scared boy waiting for a handout. He kept glancing up at the balcony, then over to his wife Brittany. Brittany was a piece of work. Blonde hair, perfectly coiffed, blue eyes wide with faux adoration, and a heart as cold as a Chicago winter. She was whispering something to her mother, Patricia. Patricia was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and looked at me like I was the help, despite the fact that I was the one paying the mortgage on her condo. I checked the feed on my phone. The hidden camera I had installed in the kitchen 10 minutes ago showed me everything I needed to see. Brittany had pulled a small packet from her bra. She dumped it into a glass of vintage champagne. She swirled it around, watching the powder disappear. It wasn't sugar. It wasn't a sweetener. I had seen enough street drugs in my life to know a sedative when I saw one. Or maybe something worse. They didn't want me dead, not yet. They needed me incapacitated. Here she came. Brittany walked up the spiral staircase, the glass in her hand. Her smile was bright, too bright. "Dad," she chirped, her voice high and grating. "You have to try this. It is the vintage reserve, just for you." I took the glass. My hand was steady. Her hand trembled just a fraction. It was a micro tremor, something you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. But I was always looking. I held the glass up to the light. To anyone else, it looked like expensive champagne. To me, I saw the tiny, undissolved grains of white powder swirling at the bottom. Sediment, she would say. Poison, I knew. Just this morning, I had signed the papers. $35 million in cash. Darius had been there, eyes glued to the pen, sweat beading on his forehead. But Brittany's eyes were glued to the exit strategy. If I had a stroke tonight, if I became mentally incompetent, Darius would get power of attorney, and Brittany would get the checkbook. It was a classic play, greedy, sloppy, and predictable. She looked at me waiting. Her eyes darted to my lips. "Drink up, Dad," she urged, touching my arm. "To your freedom." I needed a distraction. I saw a waiter passing by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I stepped forward, feigning a stumble, my elbow knocking hard into the waiter's shoulder. "Watch it," I barked, playing the grumpy old man perfectly. The tray wobbled. Canapés slid onto the floor. The crash of ceramic shattering echoed through the balcony. Brittany turned, gasping, checking her designer dress for stains. "Oh my God, you clumsy idiot!" she hissed at the waiter. That was my window. 3 seconds. That was all I needed. Her mother, Patricia, had left her glass on the high-top table right next to me while she rushed over to scold the waiter. Patricia, the woman who had spent the last 5 years making subtle jokes about my background, about how I was too rough, too street for her delicate family. I switched the glasses. Smooth, fast, invisible. I didn't spill a drop. By the time Brittany looked back, I was holding Patricia's glass, and Patricia's glass, the poisoned one, was sitting innocent and deadly on the table where mine had been. Patricia turned back, scoffing at the waiter. She grabbed the glass from the table without even looking. "Desmond, try not to cause a scene," she sneered, adjusting her pearls. "Honestly, you simply cannot take the ghetto out of the man, can you?" I smiled. It was a predator's smile, the one I used right before I acquired a rival company and fired their board of directors. "To family," I said, raising my glass. "To family," Patricia echoed, rolling her eyes. She drained the glass in one long swallow. I watched her throat move. I watched the liquid go down. I just sipped mine. It was crisp, cold, and clean. The clock started ticking. I checked my watch. If my guess was right, whatever Brittany had put in that drink was fast acting. You don't drug an old man at a party unless you want the show to start before the guests leave. "Let's go downstairs for the speeches," Brittany said, taking my arm. She was practically vibrating with excitement. She thought she had won. She thought the old man was walking to his doom. We walked down the grand staircase. The guests applauded. Darius looked at me, then looked away, guilt written all over his face. He knew. My own son knew they were trying to take me out, and he was letting it happen. That hurt more than the poison ever could. But pain is a great motivator. We reached the bottom of the stairs. Patricia was standing near the DJ booth, fanning herself. Her face was flushed. She swayed slightly. "Is it hot in here?" Patricia asked, her voice slurring just a little. "Are you okay, Mom?" Brittany asked, glancing at me. She was waiting for me to fall over. She wasn't watching her mother. "I feel," Patricia started. Then she giggled. It was a high, manic sound. "I feel like dancing." Suddenly, Patricia ripped off her pearl necklace. The string broke. Pearls scattered across the dance floor like marbles. She let out a scream that stopped the music. "Get these bugs off me!" she shrieked, clawing at her expensive silk dress. The room went silent. Patricia's eyes were wide, the pupils dilated so large her eyes looked black. She started tearing at her clothes, ripping the silk. Foam began to gather at the corners of her mouth. Mom Brittany screamed, rushing to her. Patricia shoved her daughter away with surprising strength. She pointed a shaking finger at the crowd, then at me. But she wasn't seeing me. She was seeing monsters. She started shouting slurs, words so vile and hateful that the guests gasped. These were the words she usually whispered behind closed doors, but the drug had unlocked the cage. "She's having a stroke," someone yelled. "No," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the panic. "She's high." Brittany whipped her head around to look at me. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She knew. In that split second, she realized exactly what had happened. She looked at her mother, who was now on the floor, convulsing and speaking in tongues, and then she looked at me. "What did you do?" Brittany hissed, her voice trembling. "Me?" I asked, taking a sip of my clean champagne. I stood 2 meters away from her. Maybe she just couldn't handle her liquor. "I hear addiction runs in your family." "Desmond, help her!" Darius screamed, rushing over. I pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. But I didn't give them the address of the estate. I gave them the address of the old warehouse district 3 miles away. It would take the ambulance at least 20 minutes to correct the mistake. 20 minutes for the show to go on. 20 minutes for the toxicology to become undeniable. Brittany was trying to hold her mother down. Patricia bit her hand. Brittany screamed. "This is your fault!" Brittany yelled at me, tears streaming down her face. "You poisoned her!" I looked her dead in the eye. "Careful, Brittany," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Accusations require proof, and the only fingerprints on that glass are yours." She froze. She looked at the shattered glass on the floor. She realized she was trapped. I turned to the crowd. My face was a mask of concern. "Please, everyone, clear the room," I announced. "Patricia is having a personal episode." As the guests hurried out, whispering and recording on their phones, I stood over the chaos. My son was crying. My daughter-in-law was panicking. Her mother was raving mad. And I was just getting started. This was just the opening move. They wanted my money. They wanted my life. They were about to find out that Desmond Carter didn't retire. He just switched targets. The ballroom had transformed from a sanctuary of high society into a theater of the grotesque. Patricia was no longer the poised matriarch of the Sterling family. She was a woman possessed. The drug Brittany had intended for me was clearly a high-grade psychotropic stimulant, likely something cooked up in a basement lab to simulate dementia or induce a psychotic break. It was working faster than even I had anticipated. Patricia lunged forward, her movements jerky and unnatural like a marionette with tangled strings. She grabbed a bottle of expensive red wine from a passing waiter's tray and smashed it against the marble pillar. Glass rained down. Red liquid splattered across her face like a gruesome war paint. "There are bugs under my skin," she screamed, clawing at her own neck until she drew bright red lines of blood. "Get them out! Get them out!" The guests recoiled, forming a terrified circle around her. But Patricia was not done. She locked eyes with Mrs. Vanderhoven, the wife of the city councilman, and a woman known for her charity work. Mrs. Vanderhoven was wearing a white silk gown. To Patricia, in her drug-induced delirium, she must have looked like a target. Patricia launched herself at the woman with the strength of a lunatic. She grabbed Mrs. Vanderhoven by her perfectly styled gray hair and yanked her down to the floor. The sound of the woman hitting the ground was sickening. "You think you are better than me?" Patricia howled, saliva foaming at the corners of her mouth. And then the slurs started. Vile, hateful words that had no place in civilized society, words that belonged in the darkest, ugliest chapters of history. She screamed things about my race, about the guests, about anyone her dilated eyes landed on. It was a torrent of repressed racism that the drug had violently unlocked. The mask of the polite society lady had melted away, leaving only the ugly truth underneath. "Someone stop her!" a man shouted, but no one moved. They were too horrified, too busy recording with their smartphones. The flashlights from the cameras lit up the scene like a strobe light in a nightmare. Brittany stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. She was watching her mother destroy the family reputation in real time. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew the dosage she had put in that glass was meant to incapacitate a 200-pound man, not a fragile woman like Patricia. I stood calmly by the pillar, sipping my water. I watched the foam dripping from Patricia's chin. I watched the terror in the guests' eyes. This was the woman who had sneered at my background. This was the woman who thought she was superior. Now she was rolling on the floor, biting the leg of a chair, barking like a dog. Brittany finally snapped out of her shock. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes were wide with a realization that was bordering on madness. She ran toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. She grabbed the lapels of my tuxedo, her knuckles white. "What did you do?" she shrieked, shaking me. "What did you give her?" I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked down at her hands on my jacket, then up into her tear-filled eyes. I kept my voice level, loud enough for the nearby guests and their recording phones to hear clearly. "Get your hands off me, Brittany," I said, my voice ice cold. "You did this," she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "You switched them. I saw you near the table. You poisoned her." I gently but firmly removed her hands from my jacket and pushed her back. I smoothed the silk fabric. "Poisoned her?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Brittany, look at her. She is foaming at the mouth. She is hallucinating. This isn't poison. This looks like an overdose. I told Darius years ago that your mother had a problem with prescription pills. I told him it was only a matter of time before she mixed the wrong cocktail at a party." "Liar," Brittany wailed. "She doesn't take pills. You did this. You tried to kill me. You tried to kill her." She caught herself, but it was too late. The slip was subtle, but I filed it away. I looked around at the circle of guests. They were whispering now. They were looking at Brittany with suspicion. "She is clearly having a withdrawal episode or a reaction to narcotics," I announced to the room. "It is a tragedy when addiction destroys a family." "No," Brittany sobbed, looking around at the judging faces. "It is him. He is the monster." But she was the one screaming. She was the one whose mother was shouting racial slurs on the floor. I was just the concerned father-in-law standing tall in his tuxedo. I had isolated her. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was already being delivered. Darius was on his knees next to Patricia, trying to restrain her. She kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling. "Call an ambulance," Darius screamed, looking at me with pleading eyes. "Dad, please." I nodded solemnly. I pulled out my phone again. I dialed 911. "Yes, I need an ambulance immediately," I said into the receiver, my voice projecting calm authority. "My daughter-in-law's mother is having a severe psychotic break. She has overdosed on something. The address is 4500 Lakeshore Drive. That was the address of the abandoned textile factory on the other side of the district. It was a believable mistake in a moment of panic, or so I would claim later. But right now, it bought me time. It bought me another 20 minutes of this spectacle." I hung up the phone and watched the chaos unfold. Patricia had started ripping her own dress, now exposing her undergarments, screaming that her skin was on fire. As I watched, my mind drifted back. I wasn't in a ballroom anymore. I was back in the winter of 1978 on the south side of Chicago. The wind was cutting through my thin coat like a razor blade. I was 14 years old, standing in an alley behind a butcher shop, facing 3 boys who were bigger, older, and meaner than me. They wanted my boots. They were the only good thing I owned. I knew I couldn't win a fair fight. I knew if I waited for them to swing, I would end up bleeding in the snow without my shoes. Old man Jenkins, the local mechanic who let me sleep in his garage, sometimes had told me something that stuck with me every day since. Desmond, he had said, wiping grease from his hands. The world doesn't care if you are nice. The world cares if you are standing. If you know a fight is coming, you don't wait for the bell. You throw the first punch and you make sure they don't get up. That night in the alley, I didn't wait. I picked up a frozen brick from the ground and broke the nose of the leader before he even finished his sentence. The other two ran. I kept my boots. I looked at Brittany, who was now sobbing on the floor next to her mother, her mascara running down her face in black rivers. She had tried to take my boots. She had tried to take my company, my dignity, and my mind. She thought she was a predator because she married a rich man's son. She didn't realize she was playing with a man who had fought for every scrap of bread he ever ate. The rule hadn't changed in 50 years. Strike first, strike hard, and never apologize for surviving. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward the wrong address. I checked my watch. The show was far from over. I signaled to the head of my private security team, a massive man named Marcus, who was standing by the service entrance. He gave me a subtle nod. He knew the drill. No one left until the police arrived. I wanted statements. I wanted every witness to put on record that Patricia Sterling had lost her mind and attacked a city councilman's wife. I walked over to the bar, stepped over a pile of broken glass, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. My heart rate was normal. Brittany looked up at me from the floor, hate burning in her eyes. "I will destroy you," she mouthed silently. I lifted my glass in a mock toast. "You can try," I mouthed back. But we both knew the truth. She had brought a knife to a gunfight. And she had just accidentally stabbed her own mother. The game had shifted. I wasn't just defending my retirement anymore. I was dismantling their lives brick by brick. And the best part was, they had handed me the sledgehammer. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and cheap coffee. It was a smell I knew well. I sat in a plastic chair watching the sliding doors. Stanford Sterling burst through them like a bull in a china shop. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, but sweat was staining the collar. He looked desperate. Brittany was right behind him, still in her ruined party dress, her face a mess of tears and smudged makeup. Darius trailed them, looking like a lost puppy. Stanford spotted me and marched over, his finger pointed at my chest. "Desmond, you son of a bitch!" he roared, his voice echoing off the linoleum floors. He stopped inches from my face, his spit flying. He smelled of expensive scotch and fear. A lot of fear. "You poisoned her," he screamed, jabbing a finger at my chest. "I know you did. I am going to sue you for everything you have. I am going to bury you under so many lawsuits you will never see the sun again. You tried to kill my wife." I looked past him, seeking the one face that mattered. Darius. My son was standing a few feet behind his father-in-law. He looked pale, shaken, but he wasn't looking at Stanford with disgust. He was looking at me. His eyes were narrow, filled with a mixture of confusion and accusation. He had taken a step closer to Brittany, putting a protective arm around her. He was physically aligning himself with them, against me. "Darius," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "Do you believe this man?" Darius looked down at his shoes, then back at me. His jaw tightened. "Dad, Mom never acted like this," he said, his voice trembling. "Brittany said she saw you near the drinks. She said you did something. Why would you do this?" The words hit harder than any physical blow. My own flesh and blood. I had paid for his education, his car, his wedding. I had shielded him from the harsh realities of the world I grew up in. And in return, he stood there shielding the woman who had just tried to turn my brain into mush. He had picked a side. And it wasn't the side of the man who raised him. I stood up slowly. I was 3 inches taller than Stanford and made of harder stuff. Stanford took an involuntary step back. "Be careful with your next words, Stanford," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Accusing me of a felony in front of witnesses is a bold move for a man who owes $5 million to the Irish mob. Stanford's face went from red to chalk white. He froze. He didn't know I knew. He thought his secrets were safe. He looked around nervously, realizing that people were watching. Nurses, patients, security guards. "This isn't over," he hissed, lowering his voice but keeping the venom. "You will pay for this." I sat back down and opened a magazine, dismissing him like a servant. I didn't need to argue. I had already won the psychological war, but the real battle was happening behind the double doors of the ICU, and I needed to secure the ammunition. I waited until Stanford dragged Brittany and Darius toward the coffee machine. They were huddled together, whispering frantically. Brittany was crying again, playing the victim card for all it was worth. As soon as their backs were turned, I moved. I walked down the corridor with the confidence of a man who owned the building. In a way, I did. I had donated the new cardiac wing 5 years ago. I knew the layout better than the janitors. I bypassed the nurses' station and headed straight for the administrative offices. I stopped in front of a door marked Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief of Medicine. I didn't knock. I walked in. Dr. Thorne was sitting at his desk, rubbing his temples. He looked up startled, but his expression softened when he saw it was me. We went back 20 years. I had pulled his son out of a very bad situation involving a stolen car and some bad company. Eris owed me, and in my world, debts were always collected. "Desmond," he said, standing up, "I heard you were in the building. I heard about the incident at the party. Is it true?" I closed the door and locked it. "I need a favor, Eris," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "And I need it off the books." He looked at me, his eyes assessing. He knew I didn't ask for favors lightly. "What do you need?" he asked. "Patricia Sterling," I said. "She is in the ICU. I need you to personally secure her blood panel. I need a full toxicology screen. And I need you to keep the samples. Do not let them go to the lab for disposal. Do not let the family transfer her or sign any release forms until you have that blood locked in your private safe." Eris frowned. "Desmond, that is highly irregular. If the family asks for the records or wants to transfer her, I cannot legally stop them. Brittany Sterling is going to try to destroy those samples." I told him, my voice hard. "She is going to claim it was an allergic reaction or food poisoning. She will try to cremate the evidence if she has to. That blood proves she tried to drug me, Eris. She missed and hit her mother. If you don't secure it, a woman gets away with attempted murder." Eris paled. He looked at the family photo on his desk, then at me. He knew I was a man of my word. He knew if I said it, it was true. "I will handle it," he said quietly. "I will draw the samples myself. I will run the screen in the research lab, not the main pathology unit. No one will find it." I nodded. "Thank you, Eris." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "One more thing," I said. "If Stanford Sterling tries to enter her room alone, call security. He is desperate. And desperate men do stupid things." I returned to the waiting room, but I didn't sit. I paced. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. I checked my watch. It had been 40 minutes. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Eris. "Come to the back entrance, now." I slipped out through the emergency exit, stepping into the cool night air. Eris was waiting by the loading dock, holding a manila folder. He looked shaken. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Here," he said, thrusting the folder into my hands. "You were right." I opened the folder. The toxicology report was highlighted in yellow. I scanned the chemical breakdown. It wasn't a standard sedative. It wasn't a sleeping pill. It was a complex synthetic compound. "What is this?" I asked. "We call it Blue Devil on the street," Eris said, his voice trembling. "It is a synthetic psychotropic. It is nasty stuff, Desmond. It is used in illegal nursing homes in Eastern Europe to control difficult patients. In small doses, it makes them docile, confused. It mimics rapid onset dementia. And in a large dose," I asked, looking at the levels in Patricia's blood. "In a dose like this," Eris said, pointing to the chart, "it causes violent psychosis, hallucinations, and permanent neurological damage. It fries the frontal lobe. Whoever gave this to her didn't just want to sedate her. They wanted to turn her into a vegetable. They wanted to strip her of her mind so they could take control." I closed the folder. The picture was complete. They weren't just going to drug me for the night. They were going to chemically lobotomize me. They wanted to turn Desmond Carter, the man who built an empire from nothing, into a drooling invalid so they could sign my checks and sell my assets. It was a fate worse than death. And my son had stood by and watched. I looked at Eris. "Does the family know?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "But I have to report this to the police. This is a controlled substance." "Give me 2 hours," I said. "I need to get my affairs in order before the cops get involved." Eris hesitated, then nodded. 2 hours, Desmond. Then I filed the report. I walked away from the hospital, the folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. I pulled out my phone. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. I dialed Malik. He picked up on the first ring. "Desmond," Malik said. I saw the news. Are you okay? I am better than okay, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I am awake. Malik, listen to me carefully. Initiate Ghost Protocol. There was a pause on the other end. Ghost Protocol was the nuclear option. It was a contingency plan we had designed years ago, a scorched earth strategy intended for a hostile corporate takeover or a kidnapping scenario. It meant freezing everything. It meant moving assets into shadow accounts. It meant disappearing from the grid. Are you sure? Malik asked, his voice serious. Once we start this, there is no going back. The assets will be untouchable. The family will be cut off. It is total war. They tried to erase my mind, Malik, I said, looking back at the hospital lights. They tried to turn me into a vegetable. They declared war on me first. I am just finishing it. Do it, I commanded. Confirmed, Malik said. Ghost Protocol initiated. I hung up the phone. The night air felt crisp. I was 69 years old. I had just lost my family. I had just narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But as I walked toward the dark parking lot, I didn't feel old. I felt dangerous. The hunt was on, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. The hospital doors slid open behind me one last time. Stanford Sterling stepped out looking for someone to blame. He didn't see me in the shadows. He didn't see the predator watching him. He took out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the desperation in his posture. He was running out of time, and I was just about to speed up the clock. I got into my car and started the engine. The dashboard glowed, illuminating my face in the rearview mirror. My eyes were hard. The grief would come later. Tonight, there was only the mission. I shifted the car into gear and drove into the darkness. It was time to go home and set the trap. It was time to let the rats come to the cheese. And when they did, I would be waiting. I sat in the dark interior of my sedan, parked 2 blocks away from my own estate, watching the live feed on my tablet. The screen glowed with the grainy green tint of night vision. It had been less than an hour since the ambulance took Patricia away, yet here they were. The rats were returning to the ship not to save it, but to loot the pantry. I saw Stanford's Porsche roll up to the service entrance. He didn't even bother with the headlights. He was trying to be stealthy, which was laughable for a man who breathed heavy enough to fog up a window from 3 feet away. Brittany jumped out of the passenger seat. She was a mess. Her expensive dress was torn at the hem, and she had wiped her tears, leaving streaks of mascara across her cheeks like war paint. She looked frantic. She rushed to the keypad mounted on the brick pillar. I watched her fingers fly across the buttons. 1985. Darius's birth year. Predictable. The small LED light on the pad blinked an angry red. Access denied. I saw her shoulders stiffen. She tried again. Maybe her birthday this time. Red again. She hit the keypad with the palm of her hand, mouthing a curse word I could read clearly even from this distance. She turned back to the car, waving her arms. Stanford got out. He looked worse than she did. His tie was undone and his face was slick with sweat. He pushed his daughter aside and started punching numbers. My birthday. The date I founded the company. The date Darius graduated. Red, red, red. I had changed the codes 3 minutes after I switched the champagne glasses. I had scrubbed their access from the system entirely. They were locked out of the kingdom they thought they already owned. Stanford kicked the iron gate. The metal didn't budge. He went to the trunk of the Porsche and pulled out a tire iron. It was a pathetic sight. A man who claimed to be a pillar of the business community resorting to breaking and entering like a common junkie looking for a fix. He jammed the iron into the gap between the gates and started to pry. I tapped the microphone icon on my tablet. My voice boomed through the hidden speakers lining the driveway. It sounded distorted, metallic, and terrifyingly loud in the quiet neighborhood. Good evening, Stanford. On the screen, I saw them jump as if they had been electrocuted. Stanford dropped the tire iron. Brittany spun around, looking wildly into the dark bushes. Darius, who had been cowering in the back seat of the Porsche, opened the door and stumbled out looking like he was about to be sick. You are trespassing on private property, I said, my voice calm and cold. Stanford recovered first. He picked up the tire iron and pointed it at the security camera mounted on the pillar. Open the gate, Desmond, he screamed, his voice cracking. We know you are watching. We need to get some things for Patricia. We need her medical records. Lies. They didn't care about records. They wanted the wall safe in my study. They wanted the cash reserves and the bearer bonds I kept for emergencies. They needed liquid assets, and they needed them tonight. You have exactly 3 minutes to leave my property, I announced. 3 minutes, Stanford yelled. Or what? You are going to call the police. Go ahead. Tell them you poisoned my wife. I will tell them you are holding my property hostage. He went back to prying at the gate. He was desperate. Panic had overridden his self-preservation instinct. He was sweating profusely, shaking with the exertion. Brittany was pacing behind him, biting her nails. 2 minutes, I said, marking the time. I switched the camera view on my tablet. I selected the feed from the east side of the estate, the kennel run. Inside, my 3 Dobermans were pacing. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. I had trained them myself. They weren't family pets. They were security assets. They hadn't eaten since morning because I kept them lean and I kept them hungry. Stanford managed to bend the metal slightly. He was making progress. He turned to Darius. Get over here and help me, you useless coward, he shouted at my son. Darius hesitated, looking at the camera, then at his father-in-law. He took a step forward. That step broke my heart a little more, but it also hardened my resolve. He was choosing them again. 1 minute, I warned. Stanford swung the tire iron and smashed the lens of the gate camera. The feed went dead. Static filled that quadrant of my screen. Big mistake, Stanford. I switched to the wide-angle lens on the roof. I could still see them. They thought they were invisible now. They were prying harder. Time is up, I whispered to the empty car. I pressed the button marked Release. On the screen, the hydraulic doors of the kennel slid open. It was a silent mechanism. The dogs didn't bark. They just poured out of the enclosure like black oil moving fast and low to the ground. They knew the perimeter. They knew an intruder when they smelled one. It took them 10 seconds to reach the driveway. Brittany saw them first. She let out a scream that must have woken the neighbors 3 streets over. Dogs, she shrieked, scrambling backward. She didn't try to help her father. She didn't grab her husband. She dove into the open door of the Porsche and slammed it shut, locking it instantly. Self-preservation was the only honest trait she possessed. Stanford turned just as Alpha hit him. The dog didn't bite him, he just slammed his 80-pound body into Stanford's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Stanford went down hard. The tire iron skittered across the pavement. Darius scrambled up the hood of the Porsche, sliding on the waxed paint, trying to get to the roof. Bravo was snapping at his ankles, tearing the cuff of his expensive trousers. Stanford rolled over, scrambling on all fours, trying to get away. Charlie was blocking the gate, growling a low rumble that vibrated through the air. Stanford looked at the car, then at the fence line. He realized the car was locked and his daughter wasn't opening it. He ran for the fence. It was a 6-foot wrought iron perimeter. Stanford wasn't an athlete, but fear gave him wings. He leaped, grabbing the iron bars. He was clutching a brown leather satchel to his chest. I hadn't noticed it before. He guarded it like it was his own heart. Alpha jumped his jaws, snapping inches from Stanford's shoe. Stanford kicked out wildly, connecting with the dog's snout. The dog yelped but recovered instantly, preparing to jump again. Stanford hauled himself up his suit jacket, tearing on the ornamental spikes. In his panic, as he swung his leg over the top, the leather satchel slipped from his sweaty grip. No, he screamed, reaching for it. But it was too late. The bag fell. It landed with a heavy thud on the grass inside the gate, right next to where Charlie was standing guard. Stanford hesitated on top of the fence. He looked at the bag, then at the 3 dogs circling it. He made the calculation. His life or the bag? He chose life. He dropped down onto the other side of the fence, landing in the drainage ditch. I saw him scramble up, muddy and limping, and run into the darkness, leaving his car, his daughter, and his precious bag behind. I waited until I saw the Porsche reverse, blindly screeching tires as Brittany drove away, leaving her husband clinging to the roof rack. Darius rolled off onto the grass outside the gate as the car sped off. He picked himself up and ran after it. The show was over. I started the Lincoln and drove slowly up the block. I pulled into the driveway. The dogs came to the car tails, wagging their job done. I rolled down the window and tossed them each a strip of dried beef I kept in the glove box. Good boys, I said softly. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The brown leather satchel lay on the manicured lawn, wet with dew. It looked expensive. Italian leather custom stitching, the kind of bag a man uses to carry his life's work. I picked it up. It was heavy. I carried it back to the car and sat in the driver's seat, turning on the dome light. My hands were steady as I unzipped the main compartment. It wasn't cash inside. It wasn't jewelry. It was a ledger and a stack of documents. I pulled out the top document. It was a single sheet of thick, creamy paper. The handwriting was aggressive, sharp strokes in black ink. It was a promissory note. I scanned the numbers. $5 million. I looked at the date. The due date was tomorrow. And then I looked at the name of the lender. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a venture capital firm. It was a name that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The Vori, the Russian syndicate. I sat back against the leather seat, letting out a long breath. The puzzle pieces slammed together. This wasn't just about greed. This wasn't just about them wanting my money to buy yachts and penthouses. This was about a noose tightening around Stanford's neck. He had borrowed $5 million from the Russian mob. He had likely gambled it away or sunk it into failing business ventures trying to keep up appearances. And now the bill was due. He didn't have the money. He was a dead man walking. I was his piggy bank. I was his survival plan. If I died tonight or was declared incompetent tomorrow, he could access my assets, pay off the mob, and save his own skin. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to stay alive. I looked at the bag again. This was it. This was the leverage. This was the smoking gun. He couldn't go to the police about the dogs because I held the proof of his debt to criminals. He was trapped. I closed the bag and threw it onto the passenger seat. You wanted a war. Stanford, I said to the empty car, you brought wolves to my door, but you forgot one thing. I am the one who feeds them. I put the car in gear. I had the motive. I had the evidence. And now, thanks to the date on that loan shark note, I knew exactly how much time I had to finish them. 24 hours. The game had just become lethal, and I was holding all the cards. I sat in my study watching the rain hammer against the bulletproof glass. It was 8 in the morning. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I was waiting. I knew he would come. Darius didn't have the stomach for consequences. He never did. When the doorbell rang, I didn't need to check the camera. I unlocked the front door remotely and waited behind my mahogany desk. Darius walked in. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and got burned. His clothes were rumpled, likely the same ones he wore during the dog attack. His eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He didn't sit. He stood in front of my desk, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. I need $5 million, Dad, he said. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was okay after the poisoning attempt. He just asked for the money. I looked at him over the rim of my coffee cup. $5 million? I repeated, calm and low. That is a specific number. Is that for the Russians? Darius flinched. His face went gray. How do you know about them? He whispered. I know everything, Darius, I said. I know Stanford borrowed money he couldn't pay back. I know he is desperate. What I don't know is why you are here asking for it instead of him. Did he send you to do his begging? Darius looked at the floor, then at the wall, anywhere but my eyes. He didn't send me, Dad. I need it. If he doesn't pay, they kill him. And if they kill him, they come for me. I set my cup down. The sound was sharp in the silent room. Why would they come for you, Darius? You didn't borrow the money. He started to cry. It was a pathetic sound, a soft mewling that made my stomach turn. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He slid it across the desk. I smoothed it out. It was a document I recognized. A personal guarantee. I signed it, he choked out, 6 months ago. Stanford said it was just a formality for a bridge loan. He said the business was turning around. He needed a co-signer with assets. I pledged my future inheritance. I pledged my shares in Carter Logistics. I stared at the paper. My own son had bet against my life. He had signed away my legacy to a mobster to help a man who despised me. He had literally sold my death to pay for his wife's lifestyle. So you are not just a coward, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. You are a traitor. You leveraged my company, my sweat, my blood. For them, they are family. Dad. Darius shouted, his voice cracking. Brittany loves me. Stanford treats me like a son. Stanford treats you like a wallet, Darius, I countered. A wallet he can empty and discard. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the gray sky. I had a choice. I could let the Russians handle this. They would tear Stanford apart, and they would likely hurt Darius too. Or I could intervene. Not for Stanford. Never for him. But for the memory of the boy Darius used to be before Brittany sank her claws into him. I turned back to him. I will pay it, I said. Darius slumped with relief. He practically collapsed onto the chair. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. I knew you would help. I will tell Stanford. I held up a hand. Sit down, Darius. I am not done. I will pay the debt. I will buy the note from the Russians, and I will burn it. But there is a price, and it is not negotiable. Darius looked at me wary now. What price, he asked. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper I had typed up while waiting for him. I placed it in front of him next to a heavy fountain pen. This is a contract, I said. It states that I will clear the debt of $5 million immediately. In exchange, you will file for divorce from Brittany Sterling this morning. You will cut all contact with Stanford and Patricia. And you will sign a document formally renouncing any and all claims to my estate, my company, and my assets. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back and your life. Darius stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Divorce, he whispered. Dad, she is my wife. She is pregnant. She is not pregnant, I said bluntly. I saw the medical records in the bag Stanford dropped. She had a tubal ligation 3 years ago. She is lying to you, Darius, just like she lied about the poisoning, just like she lied about loving you. He shook his head violently, covering his ears like a child. Liar, he screamed. You are lying. You always hated her. You want me to be alone like you. You want me to be miserable. I am offering you freedom. Darius, I said, my voice hard. Freedom from a family that tried to murder your father. Freedom from a debt that will get you killed. Sign the paper. Choose me. Choose your blood. Or choose them and walk out that door. Darius stood up. He was trembling, but this time it wasn't fear. It was rage. He grabbed the contract. His hands shook so hard the paper rattled. You think you can buy everyone, he spat. You think money makes you God. You are a sad, lonely old man, Desmond. Stanford was right about you. You are heartless. He ripped the paper in half, then in quarters. He threw the pieces in my face. They fluttered down like snow on a grave. I choose them, he yelled. I choose love. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. I hope you die alone in this big, empty house. I hope the Russians come for you too. He turned and marched to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. Don't contact me again, he said. As far as I am concerned, I have no father. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house, a final punctuation mark on 32 years of fatherhood. I stood there for a long time watching the pieces of the contract on the floor. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange, hollow lightness. The tumor had been cut out. The surgery was brutal, but the patient would survive. I sat back down in my leather chair. I opened the large, leather-bound ledger on my desk. It was my will, the one I had updated just last month. I picked up the fountain pen. The ink was black. Permanent. I turned to the page listing the beneficiaries. There was only one name under the primary heir section. Darius Carter. I didn't hesitate. I drew a single thick line through his name. I pressed down hard enough to tear the paper. I wrote a date and my initials next to the strike-through. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Malik. He answered on the first ring. It is done, I said. Did he sign? Malik asked. No, I said. He made his choice. Remove him from everything, Malik. The trust, the insurance, the access codes, the company directory. If he tries to enter any Carter property, treat him as a hostile intruder. Understood, Desmond. Malik said, his voice soft. I am sorry, my friend. Don't be, I said, closing the ledger. I just saved $5 million. Malik sat across from me in the dim light of my study, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop. He was the only man I trusted. He had been my lawyer for 30 years, and he knew where every skeleton was buried because he had helped me dig the graves. He tapped a key and spun the laptop around to face me. The screen displayed a bank transfer confirmation. It was beautiful in its simplicity, $35 million. But the destination account wasn't my personal checking account at Chase. It wasn't even in the United States. It is done, Desmond, Malik said, his voice low. The funds from the sale of Carter Logistics were routed directly to the Black Hope Trust in the Cayman Islands 48 hours ago. The wire hit before the first bottle of champagne was corked at your party. I looked at the numbers. It was a failsafe I had set up weeks ago when I first noticed Brittany asking too many questions about my estate planning. I knew they were circling. I just didn't know when they would strike, so I moved the bait. On paper here in America, I was currently worth about $42 and some change. My personal accounts were empty. The mansion was owned by a shell company. The cars were leased. If they managed to hack my accounts or forge my signature tonight, they would find nothing but dust. They think the money is sitting in my personal account waiting to be plucked, I said, lighting a cigar. They think they just need to get power of attorney to transfer it to themselves. Malik nodded. The decoy account is active. I set it up to look like a standard high-yield savings account. If anyone checks the balance, it will show a pending inbound transfer of $35 million. But that transfer will never clear. It is a digital mirage. Perfect, I said, exhaling a plume of smoke. It is the cheese in the mousetrap. Now we just need to make sure the rats are hungry enough to snap their necks trying to get it. Malik closed the laptop. You know what comes next, Desmond. If they find out the money is gone, they might run. Stanford might flee the country to escape the Russians. Brittany might cut her losses and disappear. We need to keep them here. We need to make them believe the money is within reach, but locked behind a door only I can open. I know I said standing up. I need to look vulnerable. I need to look like the poison is finally working. I need to look like a confused old man who just wants to sign the check and go to sleep. I picked up my phone. It was time to give the performance of a lifetime. I was going to use my son one last time, not as a partner, but as a messenger boy. I dialed Darius. He answered on the second ring. He sounded out of breath, likely pacing in whatever hole Stanford was hiding in. What do you want? He snapped. I told you I have no father. I let my voice tremble. I pitched it up an octave, adding a breathless wheeze that sounded like panic and exhaustion. Darius, please, I stammered. I don't know what is happening. The bank just called. They said the money is there, the $35 million, but I can't read the numbers. The screen is swimming. My head hurts so bad, son. I think something is wrong with my brain. There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. The greed was overriding the anger. The dollar signs were flashing in his eyes. The money is there, he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. It cleared. Yes, I said, letting out a sob. It is all there, but I can't manage it. I don't know the codes. I can't remember my password, Darius. I tried to write a check to pay the Russians like I promised, but my hand won't stop shaking. I am scared, son. I think the stress is killing me. I just want it to stop. I just want someone else to handle it. I waited. The hook was in the water. Dad, listen to me, Darius said, his voice suddenly urgent and fake, soothing. Stay there. Don't call anyone else. Don't call the bank. You are just having a stress reaction. You need rest. We can help you. I can't, I whispered. I am locking the doors. I don't want anyone to see me like this. I am going to sleep. Maybe tomorrow my head will be clear. No, Darius shouted. Not tomorrow. Dad, you need help now. If you can't sign the papers, we can't pay the debt. You have to let us help you. I hung up the phone mid-sentence. I dropped the phone on the desk and looked at Malik. My face was dry. My hands were steady. He took the bait, I said. Malik smiled a thin, humorless smile. Now we wait. I turned to the wall of monitors in my study. I had access to the security cameras in Stanford's temporary hideout. It was a dingy motel on the outskirts of town paid for with cash. I had tracked them there using the GPS on the family car Darius had taken. On the screen, I saw Darius burst into the room. Stanford was sitting on the edge of the bed holding a bottle of vodka. Brittany was pacing. He has the money, Darius yelled, waving his phone. He just told me. It cleared. $35 million, but he is losing it. He says he can't remember his passwords. He says his brain is swimming. He wanted to pay the debt, but he couldn't physically write the check. Stanford stood up so fast he knocked over the bottle. His eyes were wide with desperation. He is cracking, Stanford said. The old man is finally breaking down. Maybe the Blue Devil residue is kicking in. Maybe it is just the pressure. It doesn't matter. The money is there. But he locked the doors, Brittany said, chewing her lip. If he goes to sleep, he might not wake up, or he might wake up lucid and change his mind. We need that money today. The Russians gave us until midnight. We can't wait for him to sign it voluntarily, Stanford said, pacing the small room. If he is confused, he is a liability. We need to take the choice away from him. What do you mean? Darius asked. I mean, we stop asking and we start taking. Stanford hissed. We need emergency guardianship. If he is mentally compromised, we can get a court order. We can declare him incompetent. If we have that order, I can walk into the bank as his legal guardian and transfer the funds myself. I don't need his signature. I just need a judge's stamp. But that takes weeks, Darius said. Not if you have the right doctor, Stanford said, pulling a burner phone from his pocket. I know a guy. Dr. Vance. He lost his license last year for writing script prescriptions, but he still has his seal. For 50 grand, he will sign anything. He will swear Desmond Carter has advanced dementia and is an immediate danger to himself. Brittany looked at her father, then at her husband. Do it, she said. Call him. Stanford dialed. I watched on the screen as he made the arrangement. He was sealing his fate. He was involving another criminal in a federal conspiracy. He was creating a paper trail of fraud that would lead straight to prison. I looked at Malik. They are going for the guardianship, I said. They are bringing in a dirty doctor. Malik opened his briefcase and pulled out a fresh file. Then we let them, he said. Let them file the motion. Let them present the fake medical evidence to a judge. The moment they file that paperwork, they commit perjury and fraud. It is the final nail in the coffin. I poured myself a drink. The trap was set, the cheese was poisoned, and the rats were starving. Get the car ready, Malik, I said. I have an appointment to play the role of a senile old man, and I intend to win an Oscar for it. Stanford met Dr. Vance in the back booth of a 24-hour diner that smelled of grease and regret. I watched the meeting through the pinhole camera my investigator had installed in the napkin dispenser an hour before they arrived. Stanford looked like a man whose soul had been repossessed. His suit was wrinkled and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. It was stuffed with $50,000 in cash money Brittany had likely pulled from maxing out the last of the emergency credit cards she forged in my name. Dr. Vance didn't look like a healer. He looked like a man who traded prescriptions for silence. He had shaky hands and a face mapped with broken capillaries. He didn't even count the money. He just shoved the envelope into his coat pocket and pulled a file from his battered briefcase. This certifies that Desmond Carter has stage 4 Alzheimer's. Vance rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. It documents a 5-year history of cognitive decline, violent outbursts, and a complete inability to manage financial or personal affairs. It states that you require immediate emergency guardianship to prevent him from squandering his estate. Stanford grabbed the file, his knuckles white. Is it watertight? He asked, sweat beading on his forehead. If anyone checks the dates or the medical history, will it hold up? Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It is on my official letterhead, he said. I am still a licensed practitioner until the board hearing next month. The court won't check the dates until after you have the money. By then it won't matter. Just make sure the old man acts the part when the social worker shows up. If he is lucid and quoting Shakespeare, you have a problem. I smiled at the screen in my study. Don't worry, Stanford. I will give them a performance they will never forget. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang at the mansion. It was Mrs. Gable, the court-appointed social worker. She looked tired, overworked, and ready to find a reason to close her case file early. I had set the stage with the precision of a theater director. I was wearing a stained bathrobe over my tuxedo trousers, one slipper missing. I had left a pot of water boiling on the stove until the whistle was shrieking through the house, a sound designed to induce anxiety. I had scattered Monopoly money across the living room floor mixed with a few real $100 bills. Malik opened the door, his face a mask of concern. He is having a very bad day, Mrs. Gable, Malik whispered, ushering her in. He keeps calling me by his brother's name. His brother died in 1992. I sat in my armchair staring blankly at a television that wasn't even plugged in. I held the remote control upside down, pressing buttons with frantic, nonsensical rhythm. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Gable said, stepping carefully over the pile of fake cash. I am here to see how you are doing. I looked up at her. I let my jaw go slack. I squinted, tilting my head like a confused dog. Martha, I asked, my voice trembling and weak. Is that you? You are late for dinner. The roast is burning, Martha. Why did you leave me? Mrs. Gable frowned and scribbled in her notebook. Disoriented. Hallucinating. Mr. Carter, do you know what year it is? She asked, stepping closer. I laughed, a high, thin sound that grated on the ears. It is the year of the tiger, I said, standing up suddenly. I need to pay the union dues. Where is my checkbook? The boys on the docks need their cut, or they will break my legs. I fell to my knees and started frantically grabbing the Monopoly money, stuffing it into the pockets of my bathrobe. They are coming for it, I whispered, leaning in close to her legs, grabbing her hem. The Russians. No, wait. The Germans. They want my boots. Don't let them take my boots, Martha. Mrs. Gable recoiled, pulling her skirt away. She looked at the boiling pot in the kitchen, which was now rattling on the burner. She looked at the mess on the floor. She looked at the wild look in my eyes. I have seen enough, she told Malik, snapping her notebook shut. He is a danger to himself and others. He cannot live alone. He needs immediate custodial care. She left without looking back. She didn't see me wink at Malik as the door closed. The report would be scathing. It was exactly the ammunition they needed to hang themselves. The emergency hearing was held at 4 o'clock that afternoon. I didn't attend. Malik went on my behalf and offered a weak, stumbling defense designed to fail. He told the judge I was indisposed. He presented the social worker's report without objection. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for neglect, signed the order in 10 minutes. Darius Carter was granted immediate temporary guardianship of Desmond Carter and his estate. It was a license to steal. It was the key to the kingdom. I watched the celebration from the hidden cameras in the motel room. They didn't even wait to get back to a safe location. They popped a bottle of cheap sparkling wine right there sitting on the stained bedspreads of the motel. "We did it," Brittany squealed, hugging Darius. "We actually did it. We control everything. The house, the accounts, the 35 million. Stanford was pacing, reading the court order over and over again as if it were a holy text. "This is it," he said, his voice thick with relief. "The bank opens at 9 tomorrow. We go in. We present this order. We transfer the 35 million to the offshore shell account I set up. Then we pay the Russians. We are free." Darius was drinking straight from the bottle. He looked manic, his eyes bright with a feverish greed. "I am the CEO now," he shouted, jumping on the bed. "I am Desmond Carter. He is just a ghost. I own it all." I sat in my study sipping a glass of water. They were celebrating their own funeral. They thought they had won the lottery. They didn't realize they had just signed a confession to federal fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. The sun was setting over the city. It was the last sunset Stanford Sterling would ever enjoy as a free man. "Get some sleep, rats," I whispered to the screen. "You have a big day tomorrow." I turned off the monitor. I needed to pick out a suit for the bank. I wanted to look my best when I dropped the guillotine. I walked to my closet and selected a charcoal 3-piece suit. It was sharp. It was intimidating. It was the suit of a man who was about to conduct a hostile takeover. Tomorrow morning the bank would become a slaughterhouse, and I would be the butcher. The automatic glass doors of First National Bank slid open at 9 o'clock sharp. They walked in like they owned the vault. Stanford led the pack wearing a fresh suit that probably cost the last of his credit limit. Brittany clicked behind him in heels that were too high for a Tuesday morning, clutching a Prada bag that I knew was a fake. And then there was Darius. My son looked like a man walking to his own execution, but with a winning lottery ticket in his pocket. He was holding the court order with both hands, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the marble lobby with a mix of terror and manic excitement. I watched them from the tinted glass of the VIP office on the mezzanine level. I was sitting in a leather chair sipping an espresso. Across from me sat Arthur Henderson, the branch manager. We had played chess together every Saturday for 15 years. Today the board was the bank lobby, and I had already moved my queen. They marched straight to the main desk. Stanford slammed his hand on the counter, making the young teller jump. "We need to see the manager immediately." Stanford barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We have a court order for an emergency wire transfer. It is a matter of extreme urgency." The teller, a smart girl named Sarah, who I had hired 3 years ago, didn't flinch. She looked at the disheveled trio with professional detachment. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked calmly. "I am the legal guardian of Desmond Carter." Darius interrupted, shoving the paper in her face. "This is a judicial decree signed by Judge Reynolds. It gives me full control over all assets, accounts, and holdings. I want to transfer the balance of the primary holding account to an offshore entity. Now." Sarah typed something on her keyboard. She picked up the phone. "Mr. Henderson," she said into the receiver. "The Carter party is here." "Send them up," Henderson said, winking at me. I stood up and moved to the private adjoining room. I watched through the slats of the blinds. They came up the stairs, breathless and sweating. They burst into Henderson's office without knocking. Stanford threw the file onto the mahogany desk. "Transfer it," Stanford demanded, not even bothering to sit. $35 million. Wire it to this account in the Cayman Islands. We have the routing number right here. Brittany was practically vibrating. She was already spending the money in her head. I could see it in her eyes. She was buying cars, houses, jewelry. She was erasing her miserable little life and painting a new one in gold. Darius sat down, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is the money ours?" Henderson put on his reading glasses. He took his time. He read every line of the court order. He checked the seal. He checked the signatures. He looked at the routing number Stanford had provided. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Stanford was tapping his foot. Brittany was chewing her lip. "Everything appears to be in order," Henderson said, finally peering over his glasses. "The court has indeed granted Mr. Darius Carter temporary guardianship. You have the legal authority to move the funds." Stanford let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Thank God," he whispered. "Do it! Do it now!" Henderson turned to his computer. He typed in his authorization code. He hit enter. He frowned. He hit enter again. "Is there a problem?" Brittany asked, her voice shrill. Henderson looked up his face, a mask of polite confusion. "Well, there is a small issue with the amount you requested," he said. "What issue?" Stanford snapped. "The sale closed 3 days ago. The buyer confirmed the wire. $35 million. It is in the account." "It was in the account," Henderson corrected gently. "But as of this morning, the current available balance in Mr. Carter's personal checking account is $42.16. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the computer fan. $42, Darius whispered. "That is impossible," Stanford roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "You are lying. Check again." "The sale money. Where is the sale money?" Henderson turned the monitor around so they could see. "As you can see here," he pointed with a gold pen. "The proceeds from the sale of Carter Logistics were automatically swept into the Black Hope Trust. It is an irrevocable charitable trust established by Mr. Carter 48 hours before this court order was signed." "Charitable trust," Brittany screeched. "What does that mean?" "It means the money belongs to the National Veterans Association," Henderson explained. "The beneficiary is a nonprofit organization. Mr. Carter no longer owns the capital. He simply manages the board. And since the trust is irrevocable, not even a legal guardian can touch the principal. It is locked. Forever." $42. Darius repeated, his face losing all color. "No," Stanford yelled, grabbing the monitor and shaking it. "This is a trick. He is senile. He couldn't have done this. He doesn't even know what year it is. We have a doctor's note." Henderson sat back, crossing his arms. "Actually, Mr. Carter seemed quite lucid when he set it up," he said. The door to the adjoining room opened. I stepped out. I was wearing my charcoal 3-piece suit. My tie was perfect. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't confused. I looked like the man who had crushed unions and hostile takeovers for 4 decades. "Hello, family," I said, my voice filling the room. Brittany screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure terror. She jumped back, knocking over a potted plant. Darius fell out of his chair, scrambling backward on the floor as if he had seen a ghost. Stanford froze. He looked at me, then at the empty bank account on the screen, then back at me. His eyes were wide, the pupils pinpoint small. He realized the game was rigged. He realized he wasn't the player. He was the piece. "You," Stanford gasped. "You are awake." "I was never asleep, Stanford," I said, walking over to the desk. I picked up the court order and ripped it in half. "You stood in my kitchen and planned to rot my brain," I said, looking down at Darius, who was cowering on the carpet. "You stood there and laughed about turning me into a vegetable. You thought I was a helpless old man. You forgot who I am. I am Desmond Carter. I came from the gutter. I fought for every dime, and you thought you could take it from me with a piece of paper and a dirty doctor. It wasn't me," Brittany sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at her father. "It was him. Stanford made us do it. He owes money. He forced us." "Shut up," Stanford hissed, sweating profusely. "Oh, I know about the money," I said, leaning against the desk. $5 million to the Vori. Due today." Stanford's face turned gray. "How do you know that?" he whispered. I picked up the leather satchel he had dropped in my yard the night before. I tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "You dropped this," I said. Stanford reached for the bag, but stopped. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a loud, aggressive vibration. He didn't want to look at it. He knew what it was. "Answer it, Stanford," I said, cold and low. "It is rude to keep your friends waiting." He pulled the phone out with trembling hands. He looked at the screen. It was a text message. I didn't need to see it to know what it said. You have 2 hours, I said, checking my Rolex. The Russians are punctual people, Stanford. They don't like excuses. And they definitely don't like bounce checks. Darius looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please, he begged. Help us. They will kill him. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had sold my life for a payout. I looked at the man who had stood by while they plotted to erase my mind. I don't have a son, I said. My son died the moment he signed a guarantee on my life. I turned to Henderson. Arthur, I believe these people are trespassing. Please call security. No, Stanford yelled. You can't do this. You have the money. You have $35 million in that trust. You can sign it over. You can save me. I smiled. It was the coldest smile of my life. I agreed, but I would rather watch you run. Security guards appeared at the door, big men in uniform. Get them out, Henderson ordered. Stanford looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, only the raw animal panic of a man who knows the butcher is coming. He turned and ran. He shoved past the guards, sprinting out of the office, leaving his daughter and son-in-law behind. Brittany ran after him, screaming for her daddy. Darius stood up slowly. He looked at me. He waited for a word, a sign of mercy. I turned my back on him and looked out the window at the city I had conquered. Goodbye, Darius, I said. I heard his footsteps leave the room. I heard the elevator ding. I was alone with Henderson. The room was quiet. That was cold, Desmond Henderson said softly. It was necessary, I replied. I watched through the window as Stanford ran out of the bank building. He was looking over his shoulder. He was checking the shadows. He checked his phone again. 1 hour and 50 minutes left. The hunt was entering its final phase, and I had a front row seat. I walked out of the bank and into the subterranean gloom of the parking garage. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. It was a smell that reminded me of ambushes. I adjusted my cufflinks and walked toward my car, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, heavy and desperate. I didn't need to turn around to know that Stanford was watching. He had run out of the bank like a man on fire, but he hadn't gone far. A man who owes $5 million to the Russian mob with less than 2 hours on the clock doesn't run away. He corners the only person who can save him. I reached my Lincoln. I didn't unlock it. I saw the reflection in the tinted window. A black van had pulled up silently behind me, blocking the exit ramp. 2 men stepped out. They were big, wearing cheap leather jackets and expressions of boredom. They weren't professionals. They were hired muscle likely picked up from a gym or a dive bar an hour ago. Stanford stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He held a phone to his ear, his eyes wide and manic. "Get him!" Stanford screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Put him in the van! Do it now!" I turned slowly. Stanford was trembling. He was pointing at me, but his hand was shaking so bad he looked like he was vibrating. Behind him, I saw Darius sitting in the passenger seat of Stanford's car. My son was watching. He had his hands pressed against the glass like a child watching a horror movie, but he didn't open the door. He didn't scream for help. He just watched. The 2 men moved toward me. One of them pulled a gun. It was a Glock held sideways, amateur style. "Get in the van, old man," the gunman grunted. "Don't make this messy." I looked at the gun. I looked at Stanford. This was his endgame. Kidnapping, extortion. He was going to try to force a signature out of me. He thought physical pain would do what the courts couldn't. He thought he could beat the money out of me. It was a primitive plan born of pure panic. I stood my ground for a moment, letting them see my face. I wanted them to remember this. I wanted Stanford to look into my eyes and see that I wasn't afraid. I was disappointed. "You are making a mistake, Stanford," I said calmly. "Shut up," Stanford yelled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just get him in the van. We are running out of time." The second man grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, bruising. He spun me around and shoved me toward the sliding door of the van. I stumbled, hitting my shoulder against the metal frame. Pain shot down my arm, but I didn't cry out. I let out a sharp exhale. Darius looked away. He couldn't watch. He couldn't stop it, but he couldn't watch. That was my son. A man who would sell his father but couldn't stomach the transaction. "Get inside," the thug hissed, shoving me onto the floor of the van. I fell onto the dirty metal floor. The door slammed shut, sealing us in darkness. The engine roared to life. I felt the vehicle lurch forward, tires screeching on the concrete. The kidnapping had begun. Stanford thought he had captured a helpless victim. He didn't know he had just invited the wolf into his den. I lay on the floor of the van, my cheek pressed against the cold, corrugated metal. The thug with the gun sat on the bench seat above me, his boot resting heavily on my spine. He was pressing down, trying to assert dominance, trying to make me feel small. I let out a groan, a sound of weakness designed to satisfy him. "Please," I wheezed. "My heart, I need my pills." "Shut up, Grandpa," the thug said, pressing harder. I let my body go limp. I stopped resisting. To them, it looked like surrender. It looked like an old man accepting his fate. But inside my mind, the calendar had flipped back 40 years. I wasn't Desmond Carter, the CEO. I was Sergeant Carter, United States Marine Corps Force Recon. The training came back instantly, as clear and sharp as if I were back at Quantico. Rule number 1 of abduction survival: do not fight in the transition zone. The point of capture is where the enemy is most alert, most adrenaline-fueled, and most likely to pull the trigger out of panic. You don't fight the grab. You wait. You conserve energy. You gather intelligence. You wait for the secondary location. I regulated my breathing. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Out for 4. I lowered my heart rate. I needed oxygen in my brain, not adrenaline. I needed to think. I analyzed my situation. 2 hostiles in the back. 1 driver. Stanford and my son were likely following in a separate vehicle. The thugs were undisciplined. I could smell stale tobacco and cheap cologne. They were talking, complaining about the traffic. They weren't maintaining noise discipline. They weren't zip-tying my hands yet. That was a mistake. I shifted my legs slightly. I moved my right foot. I felt the hard lump in the heel of my custom-made Oxford shoe. It wasn't an orthopedic insert. It was a pressure-sensitive GPS transponder. Malik had insisted on it years ago when Carter Logistics started expanding into volatile territories in South America. I had never used it. Until today. I pressed my heel down hard against the metal floor. Once, twice, 3 times. A specific pattern. A tiny, silent vibration buzzed against my soul. Activation confirmed. Somewhere in a tactical operations center across the city, a red light had just started blinking on a map. Marcus, my head of security, would be looking at that light right now. He would see that Desmond Carter was moving at 40 miles per hour away from the bank. He would see that I was off my schedule, and he would know exactly what the 3-tap signal meant. Hostile abduction, lethal force authorized. I didn't need to fight these men. I didn't need to grab the gun. I just needed to survive the ride. I needed to be the bait that led my team to the nest. Stanford thought he had cut me off from my resources. He didn't realize that I was a walking homing beacon. I closed my eyes and let my body roll with the motion of the van. I was a package. I was cargo. And I knew a thing or two about tracking shipments. I started counting seconds in my head, mapping the turns, visualizing the city grid. We were heading east, toward the industrial district, toward the water. Let them take me, I thought. Let them feel powerful. Let them think they have won. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall. And I was going to make sure they hit the ground with enough force to shatter every bone in their bodies. The van hit a pothole, jarring my ribs. I grunted. "Quiet down back there," the driver shouted. "We are almost there." I stayed quiet. I was counting. Right turn. Slowing down. Gravel under the tires. We were off the main road. The van came to a screeching halt. The side door slid open. The sudden influx of light was blinding after the darkness of the ride. Rough hands grabbed my collar and dragged me out. I didn't help them. I made myself dead weight, heavy and awkward. They cursed as they hauled me onto the gravel. I blinked, adjusting to the dim light. We were inside a massive structure, a warehouse. The air smelled of rust dust and old oil. Shafts of dusty light filtered down from high windows that were painted black. It was the old textile factory I had mentioned on the phone to 911 the night before. The irony was rich. Stanford had brought me to the very place I had used as a red herring. It was likely one of the few properties he still had access to, a remnant of a failed investment from years ago. "Get him in the chair." Stanford's voice echoed through the cavernous space. I looked up. Stanford was standing by a rusted metal table in the center of the room. He had taken off his jacket. He had rolled up his sleeves. He was holding a heavy wooden bat. He looked ridiculous and terrifying all at once. A banker trying to play a gangster. Brittany was there too, standing in the shadows, holding her phone up. The red light was recording. She was documenting this, either for leverage or for some twisted trophy I didn't know. Her face was hard, devoid of the fear she had shown at the house. Now that I was bound and outnumbered, she felt brave. Darius was standing by the door looking like he wanted to vanish into the walls. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, wringing his hands. The thugs dragged me to a heavy wooden chair in the center of the room. They shoved me down. One of them pulled a roll of duct tape from his pocket. He wrapped my wrists to the armrests. He wrapped my ankles to the legs. He pulled it tight, cutting off circulation. Stanford walked over. He tapped the bat against his palm. Tap, tap, tap. "Welcome to the negotiating table," Desmond Stanford said, a cruel smile twisting his face. "The bank didn't want to help us. So we are going to do this the old-fashioned way." He pulled a document from his pocket and slammed it onto the table next to a pen. "This is a transfer of ownership for the Black Hope Trust," he said. "It grants full trustee rights to me. You are going to sign it, and then you are going to call your lawyer and authorize the immediate release of funds." I looked at the bat. I looked at the document. I looked at the 3 thugs standing guard. "And if I don't," I asked, my voice calm. Stanford leaned in close. I could smell the sweat and the mints he was using to cover the alcohol on his breath. "Then I am going to break your legs," he whispered. "And then I am going to break your arms. And I am going to keep breaking things until you sign. The Russians need their money by 5 o'clock. That gives us an hour. That is a lot of time for pain, Desmond." He raised the bat. "Darius," I said, my voice cutting through the air, "are you going to watch this? Are you going to watch him torture your father?" Darius flinched. He looked up, his eyes wet. "Just sign it, Dad," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Just give him the money, please. I don't want you to get hurt." He wasn't asking them to stop. He was asking me to submit. He was asking me to pay his ransom. I looked back at Stanford. I didn't see a businessman anymore. I saw a dead man. "Go ahead, Stanford," I said softly. "Take your swing. But you better make sure you kill me, because if I walk out of here alive, I will burn your world to ash." Stanford screamed in frustration and swung the bat. It connected with my ribs. The pain was blinding, white hot. I grunted, gritting my teeth so hard I thought they would crack. I tasted blood. Again, Stanford yelled, raising the bat. I focused on the pain. I used it. It sharpened my mind. I focused on the GPS in my heel. I focused on the time. Marcus was coming. The wolves were coming. I spat a mouthful of blood onto Stanford's polished shoes. "Is that all you got?" I wheezed. Stanford roared and swung again. The night of the beasts had begun, but he didn't know he was beating a man who was already counting down the seconds to his resurrection. I adjusted my silk tie over the bandages wrapped tightly around my ribs. Every breath was a reminder of the wooden bat Stanford had swung at me in that warehouse just 48 hours ago. My security team had extracted me minutes after the torture began, leaving Stanford and his thugs unconscious in the dirt for the police to find later. But I hadn't pressed charges immediately. I had ordered my team to let them go. I wanted them free for one more day. I wanted them confident. I wanted them to walk into their own execution with smiles on their faces. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was packed with 300 of the city's elite. Journalists, business rivals, charity directors, and social climbers were all sipping champagne waiting for the announcement. I had leaked the story to the press myself. I told them Desmond Carter was holding a reconciliation gala. I told them I was going to publicly hand over the management of the $35 million Black Hope Trust to my son and his father-in-law to show the world that our family was united. It was the lie they wanted to believe. Stanford was desperate. The Russians had given him a 48-hour extension only because he promised them a massive payday. He walked into the ballroom looking like a man who had cheated death. He was wearing a tuxedo that hid the bruises my security team had left on him. Brittany was on his arm, draped in diamonds that she had likely charged to one of the fraudulent credit cards, and Darius was there, trailing behind them, looking at the floor. They spotted me near the podium. Stanford marched over, his arrogance restored. "You made the right choice, Desmond," he whispered, leaning in close so the cameras wouldn't catch the threat. "Smart man. Hand over the trust smile for the cameras and we all walk away happy." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had ordered my kidnapping. "I always make the right choice, Stanford," I said calmly. "Go take your seat on the stage. The show is about to start." Brittany smirked at me. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, a gesture so fake it made my skin crawl. "No hard feelings, Dad," she said sweetly. "It is just business." I watched them walk up the stairs to the stage where 3 chairs were waiting for them under the spotlight. They sat down, waving to the crowd, basking in the attention. They looked like royalty. They had no idea they were sitting on electric chairs. I walked to the podium. The room went silent. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit me. I looked out at the sea of faces. Then I turned and looked at my family on stage. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice steady. "We are here tonight to talk about legacy. We are here to talk about what we leave behind." My family sits behind me. They have shown me recently exactly who they are. They have shown me the true value of loyalty. And tonight I want to share that truth with all of you. Stanford nodded, expecting me to announce the transfer of funds. He was practically drooling. But first I continued, pressing a button on the remote in my hand. I want to show you a short video tribute, a compilation of moments that define the Sterling and Carter alliance. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. The room went dark. Stanford smiled, expecting a montage of family photos. Instead, high-definition footage from my lapel camera filled the screen. It was the night of the retirement party. The image was crisp. It showed Brittany standing in the kitchen. It showed her pulling the packet of white powder from her bra. It showed her dumping it into my champagne glass and stirring it with her finger. The crowd gasped. A ripple of shock went through the room. Brittany's smile vanished. She stood up, her hands trembling. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "That is fake. That is AI." But the video continued. It showed the switch. It showed Patricia drinking the poison. It showed her foaming at the mouth. Then the video cut to black for a second. When it came back, the audio was loud and brutal. It was the grainy, green-tinted footage from the warehouse. The sound of a wooden bat hitting flesh echoed through the ballroom speakers. Thwack! Thwack! The audience screamed. On the screen, Stanford was standing over me, his face twisted in a mask of rage, holding the bat. "Sign it, Desmond," the Stanford on the screen roared, "or I will break your legs." The camera panned. It showed Darius standing by the door watching his father be tortured, doing nothing. It showed Brittany recording the assault on her phone, a look of excitement on her face. The ballroom was in chaos. People were standing up shouting. Flashbulbs were exploding like fireworks. Stanford jumped up from his chair. He lunged for the screen as if he could physically tear the image down. "Stop this!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "This is a setup. He is lying." I stood at the podium unmoving. I watched them unravel. Brittany was trying to hide behind her chair. Darius was sitting with his head in his hands, weeping. I looked at the crowd. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is my legacy," I said into the microphone. "And that is why the $35 million will never touch their hands." The doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't hotel security. It was a tactical team from the FBI flanked by city police. They were wearing vests. They had weapons drawn. "Stanford, Sterling, Brittany, Carter, freeze." A federal agent shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. Stanford looked for an exit. He looked at the wings of the stage. He looked at the crowd. He realized there was nowhere to go. He realized the walls had finally closed in. He tried to run anyway. He leaped off the stage, shoving a waiter aside, trying to make it to the service exit. It was a pathetic attempt. 2 officers tackled him before he made it 10 feet. They slammed him into the carpet face down. "Get off me!" Stanford screamed as they wrenched his arms behind his back. "Do you know who I am?" Brittany didn't run. She froze on stage. An agent walked up the stairs and spun her around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was audible even over the noise of the crowd. "I am pregnant," she lied, screaming at the agent. "You can't arrest me. I am pregnant." It was her final play. Her final lie. I stood on the podium and watched. I watched them drag Stanford out, kicking and screaming. I watched them lead Brittany away. Her head hung low, her diamonds flashing under the lights of the cameras that were broadcasting her shame to the world. Darius sat alone on the stage. The police hadn't touched him yet. He looked up at me. His eyes were empty. He was waiting for the cuffs. He was waiting for the end. I looked at the agent in charge. I gave a subtle shake of my head. Not yet. I wanted Darius to walk out of here. I wanted him to come to me. I wanted him to face me without the shield of the law. His punishment needed to be personal. The ballroom slowly cleared, the guests ushered out by the police for statements. I stood alone in the center of the room, the debris of the party scattered around me. The screen was black now. The show was over. I touched my ribs. They still hurt, but the pain was different now. It wasn't the pain of a victim. It was the pain of a victor. I poured myself a glass of water from the podium. My hand didn't shake. I took a sip and looked at the empty stage. I had stripped them of their dignity. I had stripped them of their freedom. And tomorrow I would strip them of everything else. The hunt was over. Now it was time to bury the bodies. The rain fell in sheets, washing away the grime of the city but doing nothing to cleanse the rot inside my house. I stood in the foyer, a glass of scotch in my hand, listening to the desperate pounding on the heavy oak door. It wasn't the police, it wasn't the press, it was him, Darius. He had escaped the chaos of the ballroom, likely slipping out the service exit while the FBI was cuffing his wife. He had run back to the only safety he had ever known. He had run back to Daddy. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Darius fell inside, collapsing onto the marble floor. He was soaked, his expensive tuxedo ruined, mud splattered across his white shirt. He looked up at me, his eyes wild and red-rimmed. He scrambled to his knees, reaching for my hand, but I stepped back. "Dad," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "Dad, please, you have to listen to me. I didn't know, I swear to God, I didn't know how far they would go. I was scared. They made me do it." I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I felt a profound, exhausting hollowness. This was the boy I had taught to throw a baseball. This was the man I had groomed to take over my empire. And now he was nothing but a stranger shivering on my floor. "Get up, Darius," I said, my voice flat. "You are ruining the rug." He stumbled to his feet, water dripping from his nose. He tried to compose himself, tried to summon the dignity he had abandoned years ago. "They manipulated me, Dad," he pleaded, wringing his hands. "Brittany. Stanford. They told me you were sick. They told me we were helping you. When Stanford took you to the warehouse, I tried to stop him. You saw me. I was crying. I was paralyzed. It is a trauma response." I turned and walked into the living room. I didn't offer him a drink. I didn't offer him a towel. I sat in my leather armchair and pointed to the spot on the rug in front of me. "Stand there," I commanded. He obeyed, head hung low. "You were paralyzed," I repeated, taking a sip of scotch. "You watched a man beat your father with a wooden bat and you claim you were paralyzed. You weren't paralyzed, Darius. You were calculating. You were doing the math. You figured if I died in that chair, you would be rich by morning." "No," Darius screamed, falling to his knees again. "I love you. I am your son. You can't let me go to prison. I'm the only family you have left." I reached under the cushion of my chair and pulled out a thick blue folder. I had been saving this. It was the nuclear option, the evidence I had hoped I would never have to use. I threw the folder at his feet. It landed with a heavy slap. "Open it," I said. Darius looked at the folder, then at me. His hands shook as he lifted the cover. He read the first page, then the second. His face went from pale to ghostly white. He dropped the papers as if they burned his fingers. This isn't what it looks like," he whispered. "It looks like embezzlement, Darius," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "It looks like you have been skimming from Carter Logistics for 5 years. $200,000, phantom vendors, inflated invoices, fake consulting fees paid to shell companies registered in Brittany's name. I saw every single transaction." He looked up at me, terror replacing the pleading in his eyes. "You knew," he gasped. "I always knew," I said. "I built that company from the dirt up. Do you think a single dime moves without me seeing it? I knew the first time you took $5,000 for a trip to Vegas. I knew when you took $10,000 to buy Brittany a bracelet. I let it slide. I thought maybe you were just stupid. I thought maybe you felt entitled. I told myself it was just money. I told myself you would grow out of it." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "I was waiting for you to come to me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I was waiting for you to confess, to ask for help, to be a man. But you didn't. You just took more. And then when the stealing wasn't enough, when the money ran out, you decided to trade my life for your debt." "I didn't try to kill you," Darius screamed, tears streaming down his face. "I never touched you." "No," I said. "You just held the door open for the executioner. And that Darius is worse. You stood in that warehouse and watched me bleed. That was the moment you ceased to be my son. That was the drop that overflowed the glass." He lunged toward me, grabbing the arms of my chair. "Dad, please, I will pay it back. I will work for free. I will do anything. Just don't call the police. Don't send me to jail. I won't survive in there." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the weakness, the cowardice, the rot that Brittany had cultivated but that had taken root in his own soul. "You are right," I said calmly. "You won't survive. But that is not my problem anymore." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 3 numbers. 9, 1, 1. Darius's eyes went wide. "No," he shrieked. He tried to grab the phone, but I was faster. I stood up and shoved him back. He tripped over his own wet shoes and fell hard onto the floor. "This is Desmond Carter," I said into the phone, my eyes never leaving my son. "I have an intruder in my home. He is a fugitive wanted for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "Yes, he is here now." Darius scrambled backward, crawling toward the door like a crab. "You are crazy," he yelled. "You are a monster." "Run, Darius," I said, lowering the phone. "Run, like your father-in-law. Let's see if you are faster than the police." He didn't run. He collapsed. He curled into a ball on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. He had given up. He knew there was nowhere to go. I walked past him, stepping over his sobbing form as if he were a piece of furniture. I walked out onto the balcony into the driving rain. The water soaked my shirt, mixing with the sweat and the old pain in my ribs. Below me the sirens wailed. Blue and red lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the wet driveway. The cruisers screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, guns drawn. I heard them enter the house. I heard the shouting, hands in the air. "Get down!" I heard my son crying my name one last time. "Dad. Dad, help me." I didn't turn around. I gripped the stone railing of the balcony, looking out at the city skyline. I watched as they dragged him out the front door. He was cuffed, his head hanging low, his tuxedo mud-stained and ruined. 2 officers shoved him into the back of a squad car. He pressed his face against the glass, looking up at the balcony, looking for me. I stood there unmoving. I let him see me. I let him see that I was still standing. I let him see that the bank was closed. The car pulled away, the lights fading into the night. I was alone. The house was silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, but it was also the silence of a clean slate. The cancer was gone. I took a deep breath of the cold, wet air. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed my dignity. I went back inside, poured myself another drink, and sat in the dark. The war was over, but there was one last visit to make, one last loose end to tie up. Tomorrow I would go to the hospital. Tomorrow Patricia would pay her bill. The smell of St. Jude's Psychiatric and Neurological Care Center was different from the hospital. It didn't smell like antiseptic and hope. It smelled of boiled cabbage floor wax and permanent despair. I walked down the long linoleum corridor, my footsteps clicking rhythmically in the quiet afternoon. I wasn't rushing. There was no urgency anymore. The clock that had been ticking over my head for the last week had finally stopped. I stopped at the nurse's station. A heavy-set woman with tired eyes looked up from a computer screen. "I am here to see Patricia Sterling," I said. She checked a clipboard. "Are you a family member?" she asked. I paused. I thought about the wedding. I thought about the shared holidays. I thought about the poison in the champagne glass. "I am the only visitor she has," I replied. The nurse sighed and buzzed me through the security doors. "Room 304, she said. "Don't expect much. She has been catatonic most of the morning. The doctors say the neurological damage is extensive. The toxin caused a series of mini-strokes in the frontal lobe. She is stable, but she isn't really there." I walked to room 304. The door was open. I stepped inside. Patricia was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. She was wearing a gray hospital gown that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, usually dyed and sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was white at the roots and hung in greasy strands around her face. She looked small. She looked shrunken. She didn't turn when I entered. She was mumbling to herself, a low, incoherent stream of words. I stepped closer. I could see a string of drool hanging from her lip. Her hands, which used to be adorned with diamonds and manicured to perfection, were twitching in her lap, picking at invisible threads on the blanket. This was the woman who had sneered at my suits. This was the woman who had called me street trash behind my back. This was the woman who had willingly drunk a toast to my destruction, not knowing she was holding the gun to her own head. "Hello, Patricia," I said. Her head snapped toward me. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown. For a second there was no recognition, just the blank stare of a frightened animal. Then slowly something sparked in the depths of her damaged mind. A flicker of memory. A flash of hate. "You," she croaked. Her voice was a rasp, damaged from the screaming she had done at the party. I pulled a metal chair from the corner and sat down in front of her. I sat close enough that she could smell my cologne. Close enough that she could see that I was whole, healthy, and untouched. "Where is Brittany?" she asked, her voice slurring. "Where is Stanford?" They said they were coming. They said they were bringing the car. They aren't coming, Patricia, I said softly. Stanford is in a federal holding cell. He is facing charges for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy, and he is probably safer in there than he would be on the street with the Russians looking for him. She blinked, trying to process the information. Her face twitched. Brittany, she whispered. My baby. Brittany is in custody too, I said. She was arrested on live television. The whole world saw her in handcuffs. She is facing 15 years. She won't be coming to pick you up. No one is coming. Patricia started to cry. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was a messy, ugly sobbing. She rocked back and forth in the chair. I want to go home, she wailed. Take me to the condo. I want my things. You don't have a condo, I told her. The bank foreclosed on it this morning. Stanford used it as collateral for another loan he couldn't pay. The locks have been changed. Your things are being auctioned off to pay his debts. She stopped rocking. She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. The reality was trying to break through the chemical fog, but it was too heavy. It was too much pain for one mind to hold. Why are you here? She hissed, a flash of the old venom returning. Did you come to gloat? Did you come to laugh at me? Get out. You are nothing. You are garbage. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I didn't pull out a weapon. I didn't pull out a lawsuit. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper and a small object wrapped in velvet. I placed the paper on her lap. It was a receipt. I paid your bill for this month, I said. 30 days of care, a private room, meals, medications. It is paid in full. She looked at the receipt confused. Why, she asked. Because I am not you, I said. I don't leave people to rot in the street. This is charity, Patricia. The same charity you mocked when I gave it to the veterans. Now you are the charity case. I saw the realization hit her. I saw the shame burn her cheeks. She was living on my dime. The man she hated was the only reason she had a roof over her head. I picked up the velvet bundle and unwrapped it. It was a small hand mirror, the silver-plated one she used to keep in her purse to check her lipstick, the one she used to admire herself in while she judged everyone else. I had found it in the debris of the ballroom floor. I held the mirror up to her face. Look, I commanded. She tried to look away, but I moved the mirror. I forced her to see. I forced her to look at the gray skin, the drooling mouth, the madness in her eyes. I forced her to see the ruin of the woman who thought she was untouchable. Look at yourself, Patricia, I said, my voice hard as stone. This isn't an accident. This isn't bad luck. This is the face of greed. This is what happens when you try to steal a life. You drank the poison you meant for me. You wanted to take my mind, but you lost your own. She stared into the mirror. She started to shake. She touched her face with trembling fingers, tracing the lines of her own destruction. She let out a low moan of pure misery. You are alone, I said, lowering the mirror and placing it on her lap. You have no husband. You have no daughter. You have no home. You have nothing but this room and the bill I just paid. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I towered over her. Enjoy the month, Patricia, I said, because after 30 days the money stops. You are on your own. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me I heard the sound of the mirror hitting the floor and shattering. I heard her screaming my name, screaming curses, screaming for help that wasn't coming. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I walked out of the room and into the hallway. The nurses watched me go, their faces unreadable. They knew who I was. They knew the story. They didn't judge me. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the main entrance and stepped out into the sunlight. The air was fresh and clean. The city noise was a distant hum. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep breath. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the regret, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt lighter. The heavy stone that had been sitting in my chest for the last week was gone. The anger that had fueled me, the rage that had driven me to burn down my own family, it had evaporated. It had served its purpose. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a builder, a fighter, a survivor. They weren't stained with blood. I hadn't raised a hand against them. I had simply let them destroy themselves. I had handed them the rope, and they had tied the noose. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Malik. It is done, Malik said. The final assets have been secured. The divorce papers were served to Darius in his holding cell. The press conference is scheduled for next week to announce the foundation. Good, I said. and Desmond Malik added his voice hesitant. "Are you okay?" I looked back at the psychiatric center. I thought about the woman in room 304, shattered and alone. I thought about the son in a jail cell crying for a father he had betrayed. "I am free, Malik," I said. "For the first time in 40 years, I am completely free." I walked to my car. My driver opened the door. "Where to, Mr. Carter?" he asked. "Take me to the community center," I said. "I have a chess game with a kid named Jamal. I promised him I would teach him the Queen's Gambit." I got into the car and settled back into the seat. The engine purred. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the hospital. I looked forward. The rearview mirror was for checking for enemies. The windshield was for seeing the future. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead looked wide open. The wolves had been fed, the rats were gone, and the lion was finally ready to rest. The view from the 45th floor was different than the view from the estate. From the mansion, I looked out at manicured lawns and high fences designed to keep the world away. From the penthouse, I looked down at the grid of Chicago, the city that made me. The glass walls of my new apartment offered no place to hide, but I didn't need to hide anymore. The security system was state-of-the-art biometric scanners at every entry point and a private elevator that only moved when I told it to. But the real security came from knowing there was no one left on the outside with a key to my heart. Checkmate, old man. I looked down at the marble chessboard. Jamal was grinning at me. He was 12 years old, wearing a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big and sneakers that had seen better days. He sat across from me at the low table, his eyes bright with triumph. He had cornered my king with a rook and a knight. It was a sloppy trap, but it was effective. I studied the board. I could see 3 ways out, but I didn't take them. I wanted him to feel the win. I wanted him to know what it felt like to take down a giant. "You got me, Jamal," I said, knocking over my king. "You are getting dangerous." Jamal pumped his fist. "That is 3 in a row, Mr. Carter." "You owe me pizza." "I owe you nothing," I said, standing up and stretching my back. "We played for honor, but I am hungry, so pizza it is." I walked to the kitchen island and picked up the phone to order. I watched Jamal reset the pieces. He handled them with reverence. He was a good kid, smart, sharp. He reminded me of myself 50 years ago, before the money, before the suits, before the betrayal. I had started a mentorship program at the community center. I spent 3 afternoons a week there teaching kids how to think 3 moves ahead. It was the only time I felt like a father anymore. With Darius, I had tried to give him the world, and I ended up creating a monster. With these kids, I gave them my time and my attention, and I was watching them turn into kings. The buzzer at the door sounded. I checked the monitor. It wasn't the pizza. It was Malik. Jamal set up the board again. "Mr. Carter has business," I said. "Go into the media room and play some video games until the food gets here." Jamal nodded, grabbing a soda and disappearing into the back room. I watched him go. It was nice to have noise in the house again. It was nice to hear laughter that wasn't bought and paid for. I pressed the button to open the door. Malik walked in. He looked tired but satisfied. He was carrying a leather briefcase, the same one he had carried into court every day for the last 6 months. He set it down on the island and accepted the glass of water I slid toward him. "It is done," Malik said, taking a long drink. "The gavel came down 20 minutes ago." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I didn't ask. I just waited. Stanford Sterling was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Malik said, his voice flat. The judge threw the book at him. Kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, RICO charges because of his ties to the Russian mob. The feds wanted to make an example of him. He will die in a 6x8 cell. I nodded. It was a mercy, really. If he had walked free, the Russians would have skinned him alive. Prison was the only safe place left for him. "And Brittany?" I asked. 15 years, Malik said. Her lawyer tried to play the coercion card. She tried to say Stanford forced her. She tried to say she was a victim of domestic pressure. But the video from your lapel camera didn't lie. The jury saw her face when she mixed the poison. They saw the malice. She will be eligible for parole in 10, but with her attitude, I doubt she will make it. I looked out the window at the gray sky. 15 years. She would be 45 when she got out. Her beauty would be gone. Her money would be gone. Her reputation was already ash. She had traded her life for a glass of champagne. "And my son?" I asked. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. Malik looked down at his water glass. He swirled the liquid around. 10 years, he said softly. Embezzlement, wire fraud, accessory to kidnapping. The judge went light on him because he testified against Stanford in the final week. He turned state's evidence. It saved him 5 years, but it didn't save his soul. He cried when they read the verdict, Desmond. He called your name. I felt a sharp pain in my chest right where my heart used to be. It was a phantom pain like a limb that had been amputated. I closed my eyes. I saw Darius as a little boy holding my hand at the zoo. I saw him graduating college, and then I saw him standing in that warehouse watching me bleed. The images warred in my mind, but the warehouse won. It always won. Did he ask for anything else? I asked, opening my eyes. He asked if you were there, Malik said. I told him no. I told him you were busy. I wasn't busy. I was sitting here playing chess with a 12-year-old boy because that was all I had left to give. Good, I said. Malik reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. These are the final papers for the liquidation of the old estate, he said. The mansion is sold. The cars are auctioned. The proceeds have been deposited into the foundation accounts. You are officially liquid Desmond. No ties, no anchors. I took the envelope. It felt light. 40 years of memories packed into a manila folder. Thank you, Malik, I said, for everything. Malik put a hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to do, my friend. Do not let it haunt you. They made their beds. I know, I said. I just hate that I had to be the one to tuck them in. Malik finished his water and left. He knew I needed space. He knew the victory lap was a solitary run. I walked into the living room. The apartment was quiet except for the muffled sounds of video game explosions from the other room. I went to the fireplace. It was a gas unit, modern and clean, but the flames were real enough. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased at the corners. It was taken 20 years ago. Me, my late wife, and Darius. We were standing on the deck of a boat smiling into the sun. We looked happy. We looked like a family that could survive anything. I looked at my son's face in the photo. He was innocent then. He hadn't been corrupted by greed or a toxic marriage. He was just my boy. I thought about keeping it. I thought about putting it in a frame and hiding it in a drawer, a memento of what used to be. But I knew that was a trap. Nostalgia was a weakness. It was the crack in the armor that let the knife in. You cannot build a new life on the foundation of a dead one. You have to clear the rubble. I struck a match. The smell of sulfur filled the air, sharp and cleansing. I held the flame to the corner of the photograph. The paper curled and blackened. The fire ate the smiles. It ate the blue sky. It ate the illusion of the perfect family. I dropped the burning photo into the ashtray on the coffee table. I watched it turn to ash. I watched the faces disappear until there was nothing left but gray dust. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I let it fall. It was the last tear I would shed for Darius Carter. I took a deep breath. The air in the penthouse was filtered, cool, and pure. I felt strong. I felt awake. The poison was out of my system. The parasites were gone. I walked to the door of the media room. Jamal was sitting on the floor, intense concentration on his face as he navigated a digital character through a war zone. Hey, I said, leaning against the door frame. Jamal paused the game and looked up. Pizza here, he asked, hopeful. Not yet, I said. But I was thinking, you beat me at chess. You have a strategic mind. Jamal grinned. I got lucky. No, you didn't, I said. You saw the board. Listen, Jamal, how are your grades in math? He shrugged, looking down. They are okay. B-. Get them to an A, I said. You get straight A's in math and science, and I will pay for your college. Any college you want. Engineering, business, architecture. You pick. Jamal's eyes went wide. He dropped the controller. For real, Mr. Carter. You would do that. For real, I said. But you have to work for it. No handouts. You earn every grade. You show up every day. You learn the game. Can you do that? He stood up. He looked taller. He looked like a young man with a future. I can do it, he said, serious. I promise. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. Good, I said. Now get back to your game. I have to make a phone call. I walked back to the window. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the skyline in gold and purple. The city looked beautiful. It looked full of opportunity. I wasn't a retired old man waiting to die. I was Desmond Carter. I had $35 million in a charitable trust that was going to change thousands of lives. I had a protege who was going to be a king, and I had the rest of my life to decide what my true legacy would be. The ashes in the tray were cold. I picked up the ashtray and walked to the trash chute in the hallway. I dumped the dust down the dark shaft. "Goodbye," I whispered. I walked back into my home and closed the door. The lock clicked shut with a solid, reassuring sound. I was safe. I was whole. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for tomorrow. The envelope from the Federal Correctional Institution sat on my marble kitchen island like a heavy gray stone. It had arrived with the morning mail sandwiched between a utility bill and a brochure for a charity gala. I knew what it was before I saw the return address. I knew the handwriting. It was shaky, cramped, the script of a man writing on a metal table with a dull pencil. It was Darius. I made myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. I took my time. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, watching the morning fog roll off the lake. I wasn't afraid to open it. I was just tired of the hope that refused to die completely, tired of wondering if prison would do what a father could not. I slit the envelope open with a silver knife. The letter was 3 pages long, written on yellow legal pad paper. I sat on a stool and began to read. "Dear Dad," it began. The first page was an apology. It was well written. He talked about God. He talked about redemption. He talked about how cold the cell was at night and how much he missed the smell of home. He talked about regret. For a moment, just a fleeting heartbeat, I felt a twinge of pity. I remembered the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But then I turned to the second page, and the tone shifted. The apology became an explanation. The explanation became a defense. "It wasn't really my fault," he wrote. "Brittany was the one who pushed for the guardianship. Stanford was the one who knew the doctor. I was just scared, Dad. I was trying to protect the family legacy. I didn't want the money for myself. I wanted to save us from Stanford's mess." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. Just like the lies on the page. He was rewriting history. He was painting himself as the victim again. And then on the third page, the hook, the real reason for the letter. "I met a guy in here, a former lawyer. He says my case was mishandled. He says there were procedural errors with the evidence from the warehouse. He says we can appeal. He says I could be out in 2 years, maybe less. But I need a real lawyer, Dad, not a public defender. I need someone who knows the system. The retainer is $50,000. I know it is a lot. But think about it. If I get out, I can come work for the foundation. I can make it right. I just need this one last chance, please. Do not let me rot in here." I put the letter down. I smoothed out the yellow paper. $50,000. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted a wire transfer. He hadn't learned a single thing. He was still the man who stood in a warehouse and watched me bleed. He was still the man who thought money was the solution to every problem, even the problems caused by his own lack of character. I looked at the signature. "Your loving son, Darius." I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. The last thread of doubt severed. I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to write him back. Words were wasted on Darius. He only understood one language, the language of assets. I stood up and walked to my study. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out my personal checkbook. It was the large, leather-bound kind I used for business. I opened it to a fresh page. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one with the heavy gold nib. I filled out the date. I filled out the payee line. Darius Carter. Then I wrote the amount. I wrote it slowly, savoring the ink on the paper. $35 million and 0 cents. It was the exact amount of the sale. The exact amount he had tried to steal. The exact amount he had valued my life at. I tore the check out of the book. It made a satisfying ripping sound. I held it up to the light. It was a beautiful piece of paper. It represented freedom. It represented power. To Darius, it represented God. I set up my phone on the tripod I used for my chess tutorials. I angled it so it framed me sitting in my leather chair with the city skyline behind me. I checked the lighting. I wanted him to see my face clearly. I wanted him to see that I wasn't sad. I wasn't grieving. I was calm. I pressed record. I held the check up to the lens. I held it steady so he could read the numbers. I let him look at it for a long 5 seconds. I knew that in his cell, watching this on a smuggled phone or a kiosk tablet, his heart would leap. He would think I had broken. He would think he had won. Then I reached for the humidor on my desk. I opened it and selected a cigar. A Padron 1964 Anniversary Series. It was a cigar for celebrations. I clipped the end with a precise snap. I put the cigar in my mouth. I didn't reach for my gold lighter. I didn't reach for the matches. I reached for the check. I picked up a box of wooden matches. I struck one. The flame flared yellow and blue. I brought the flame to the corner of the check. The paper caught instantly. The fire curled the edge, turning the blue ink black. I watched the flame eat the number 3, then the 5, then the zeros. One by one, the millions disappeared into smoke. I brought the burning check to the end of my cigar. I puffed gently. The tobacco caught. The smoke swirled around my face, thick and aromatic. I held the check until the fire reached my fingertips, until the signature of Desmond Carter was nothing but ash. Then I dropped the charred remains into the crystal ashtray. I took a long drag of the cigar and exhaled slowly, looking directly into the camera lens. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him. I reached forward and stopped the recording. I opened the messaging app on my secure server. I attached the video file. I typed in his inmate messaging ID. I didn't write a long letter. I didn't explain why I did it. I didn't lecture him about morality or ethics or the law. He wouldn't understand those things. He only understood loss. I typed a single sentence. The only asset I leave you is this lesson: never bite the hand that feeds you. I hit send. I watched the progress bar. Sending, sent, delivered. Somewhere in a federal prison cell, a notification would ping. Darius would open it. He would watch his inheritance burn. He would watch his father enjoy a good smoke. And he would finally understand that the bank of Desmond Carter was closed forever. I put the phone down. I turned off the screen. The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the city below and the rhythmic breathing of a man who had finally put down a heavy load. I leaned back in my chair and watched the smoke drift toward the ceiling. It twisted and turned, forming shapes that dissolved into nothingness, just like the past. I took another puff. It was the best cigar I had ever tasted. I closed my eyes. The screen of my life went black, and in the darkness there was only peace. I spent 40 years building an empire thinking I was doing it for my family, but I learned the hard way that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. True family isn't about DNA, it is about respect. If you have to buy someone's love, you aren't a provider, you are a hostage. Do not set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Protect your peace, protect your assets, and never apologize for surviving. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect is the moment your real life begins. Walk away from the table when love is no longer being served. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself, hit that like button and tell me your story in the comments, because I read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice served cold.